have a few technical difficulties, so we had to put the presentation on a TV. I'm going to be bouncing back and forth pointing at things because the laser pointer won't work on a TV. So we will get started. This did ultimately become a part 1 of 2 because there's just so much information about the house that I couldn't talk about the whole thing. So we're going to stay primarily on the construction and exterior this evening, and then I will do another presentation focusing on the interior elements. I wanted to start with going back a little further than the mansion, with where the Howards lived originally. This is obviously a flood photo. This is the 1913 flood. This view is taken from the roof of one of the shipyard buildings. The 2-story White House was built by James Howard for his family after founding the shipyard. Sorry, not used to this being on a laptop, so some of my notes are going to be hard for me to see. Of course, he would build his house directly across from the shipyard and walk to work every day. Must have been nice. His son Edmunds took over the shipyard after his death. Edmunds and his wife Laura lived in the 1-story house here next door. This bouncing back and forth is kind of throwing me off, guys. I'm really sorry. But Laura, having grown up in Louisville, had felt that the family had reached such a level of prominence in the Jeffersonville community that they needed a new house reflecting that standing. The shipyard had really taken off. They were producing, let's see, I did a count, and I did not write it down, but because I just thought of this actually yesterday. The year the house was finished, I think they had constructed at least 13 different vessels just that year, give or take. So they started soliciting drawings from architects, local and national architectural firms. We know of at least 3 designs. We have just this one, I think, drawing of one of the designs. Of course, there's the design they chose, but then the 3rd design, we do not have that in our archives. This was submitted to oh gosh, what did I just do? It's been a night for tech people, I tell you. This was designed by Fuller and Wheeler Architects of Albany, New York. They were in business from 1883 to 1897 and primarily designed in the Richardsonian Romanesque style, which is ultimately the style the Howards chose, but they did not choose this design. And I was speculating a little bit, looking at this one, thinking about Laura being very urban with her upbringing, if maybe she thought it was a little too East Coast, Catskills country, large kind of country squire type house, and not that urban townhouse type design that everybody in Louisville was building at the time. We were out here outside of Jeffersonville city limits, but they were thinking about Jeffersonville society at the time. I'm going to briefly talk about the style that they chose for the house, the Richardsonian Romanesque, which is also known as Romanesque Revival. The style was developed by Henry Hobson Richardson, who was a prominent architect in the last half of the 19th century. He drew from Byzantine or Eastern Roman influences. Many of his commissions were prominent public buildings, but he did do a few houses, and the houses he did design are almost unrecognizable recognizable to people who know of what everyone else adapted his style into. It's like everyone pulled from his public buildings for houses instead of his house designs. Lots of mixed masonry materials and what are called Syrian arches. Over here on this building, you see this very prominent archway that almost goes all the way to ground level. You don't have columns supporting it, but it also shows up, even though this archway over this doorway is above the doorway, it's super heavy, super rusticated looking, very massive. And so the house here on the left is the Glesner house that he designed for the Glesner family in Chicago in 1886. And the building on the right is the Thomas Crane Public Library in Quincy, Massachusetts, which he designed in 1882. I will briefly bring up our most contemporary twin over in Louisville, the Conrad Caldwell House, which is Louisville's most well-known Richardsonian Romanesque style house. The adaptation of the style, like I said, was a little different than how Richardson designed houses himself, but everyone was already delving into what we know of as Queen Anne, and so they were applying the design elements to footprints that people were already wanting their houses to look like. So we've got asymmetrical footprints. We're still using mixed masonry materials, even though in the example of the Conrad Caldwell house, it is all in limestone. But you have different types of carvings and finishes on the limestone. They still used the thick arches, sometimes true Syrian, sometimes an adaptation of that. Hipped roofs, and I pulled a little statistic from the McAllister guidebook that every architectural historian knows. So it's possibly a little out of date, but they said that up to 75% of known examples have towers, and 15% have more than one tower. So Howard Mansion is in that 15%, and the Conrad Caldwell House. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Conrad Caldwell House, it was designed by Arthur Loomis and built in 1895, and it's a great place to visit. So Lauren Evans ultimately chose a design by local architectural firm Drock and Thomas, which I couldn't find any information on them. I looked at my Google encyclopedia, I looked online. I did not have time to ask you, sorry. I did run across one article about a gentleman who worked with Thomas after Drock had left. That was it. It kind of surprised me that they weren't in the Louisville Encyclopedia. But of course, here's the design they chose, the design that they built. But by this point, they had sold the little house that I pointed out that was down the street. And I realized now that I did not tell you all where these houses were located. So the auxiliary parking lot over here that used to be a part of Jeff Boat's parking was where the two-story house was. And then the little one-story house that burned a couple of years ago was where the one-story house was. And there's speculation about whether that one-story house was the same house, because it's possible it had been rebuilt after the 37 flood, because it very much looked like a bungalow but had the same footprint. So that little one-story house, they had sold it already. So the Howards enjoyed visiting architecture. I'm going to be doing this all night. They enjoyed visiting the industrial and agricultural exhibitions. I always want to say architecture instead of agricultural because architecture is on my brain. Louisville hosted 5 of these in the They were called the Great Southern Exposition. The 1883 one, Edmonds Howard purchased the 5th Street Gatehouse, put it on a barge, floated it across the river, and installed it on this lot. And that's where the family lived while they were building the house. And so this building back here is the 5th Street Gatehouse. If you look at pictures of other buildings from the Great Exposition that year, they all have this decorative detail in the eaves. Technically, we are sitting in that building today. It did suffer a catastrophic fire in 1901. They moved it further away from the house, rebuilt it, expanded the upper story, and so that is now the building that we're in today. The house first shows up on a Sanborn fire insurance map in 1891. So here is the what we now know as the carriage house, the little gatehouse they were living in. It says dwelling, and then here it says dwelling, and this is really hard to read. It says being built, and so we almost have the exact footprint. It's not quite the same as what was constructed. This sticks out a little bit more. Sorry, guys. We don't have the den because that was not on the original plans, but it was added during construction that they went ahead and built the den room on, and we don't have the porch. And then in 1898, the house is finished. So here is the full footprint as we know it, with the den and the back porch where everybody enters now to go through the museum. And the little building in the back is just a carriage house at this point. I mentioned they like these expositions. They attended the 1893 Chicago World's Columbian Exhibition, which is probably the most famous of one of these. It's also known as the White City. It is the first such event to be fully electrified with Edison lights. And Laura and Edmonds went up there on a shopping trip. They purchased some chandeliers, the dining table, and some brass beds, among other items, for the house. And of course, things like furnishings we'll cover in part 2. She traced some windows in the chapel for the exposition that were designed by Louis Comfort Tiffany because she liked the design, and she brought those tracings back here to the little area, went to Bloom Art Glass and had them make copies for the mansion. And the great thing about that is those windows had to be broken by the firefighters in 1971 so that they could gain access to the upper floors of the mansion. Those designs and Bloom Art Glass still exist, so they were able to recreate them for the mansion. So here are, we'll briefly go inside. Here are those windows in the landing of the grand staircase. So these are all now copies of the originals. But what Laura liked about them was it was kind of a nautical knotwork pattern, which fit the industry the family was in. On the left here, just zooming in on one of them so you can get a better look at it. And on the right here is the small window that's in what we call Captain Jim's bedroom. The chrysanthemum room? Pansy. I mix the two up all the time. No, it's fine, thank you. Please correct me. This window is original. This is one of the Tiffany designs that she had made by Bloom Art Glass. Of course, this one did not have to be broken and did not break during the fire, so we're very fortunate to still have that one. I threw this one in for fun. I pulled this from the Howard collection that's in the U of L Digital Archives. We have no idea who They could be relatives, they could be relatives of shipyard workers. I don't think the shipyard would have had that many women working in the office. But what's great about this photo is the house was still under construction. You can just see, this is the main or public entrance to the house here on the south elevation. It's boards, we don't have the doors installed yet, and the leaded glass up here are all boards. Those have not been installed yet. And here's that shot, same shot that I took a couple of weeks ago to show you the doors and the windows as they were installed. The mansion is 3 full stories with an attic and a full basement. There are 22 rooms and 15,000 square feet. And depending on how you count them, there are 6 main rooms on the ground floor, if you count the butler's pantry as a usable or full room. 6 rooms on the 2nd floor, if you count the palatial bathroom. And so, because I used to be a realtor, you don't normally count bathrooms. And there's 6 main rooms on the 3rd floor. So the supporting walls go from basement all the way up to the attic. So you pretty much have the same footprint with some variations on each floor. And on each floor, the rooms surround a large usable hall space. And I wasn't sure if people would be able to see this. I reproduced these from the Scenes from Memory book. It was already there and drawn up so well. Do you all want me to go room by room through what they all are? Okay. So while you're looking at the 2nd floor, there is a story that the bricks were made on site, which would have been very unusual this late into the Victorian industrial world. I was speculating that maybe they wanted some control over the brick making. There are custom bricks in the house, curved bricks in the chimney, if you're familiar with that. The bricks of the house overall do look a little more rustic than your standard, more factory, for lack of a better term, type brick that would have been made in the late Victorian era. So it's possible, but it's unusual that they would have done that. We are also unsure of the source of any of the stone. The foundation is rusticated limestone, more like a Kentucky limestone. It's not a Bedford limestone. Then of course there's the red sandstone used in window lintels and the carved plaques that decorate the house. And there would have originally been a slate roof. Asphalt shingles were only just being developed at the turn of the 20th century. All the interior wood elements were crafted in the shipyard by the shipyard workers. And they were the same styles and same woods that would have been used in river boats. And of course, once again, I'll be talking more about that in part 2. And I'll talk more about the grand staircase, which was modeled after the large swinging staircases that were in some of the river boats. Did anyone have any questions, before we leave the floor plans, did anyone have any questions about the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd floor? Yes.
Well, you haven't mentioned where the elevator was going to be, that we can see the space on there.
Well, for those of you who don't know, the board of the museum has been working off and on over the past few years. Will we, won't we, can we afford it, can we not afford it, to put an elevator in the house? Because the Howards actually built the house with the idea of putting an elevator in it at some point, and they just never did. And of course, a modern elevator would need a little more space. time period in the house.
Well, it's right there next to number
The second
19.
floor is the best one to illustrate it. So the closet that's right here in the middle is the elevator shaft. So sort of this area on the first floor, off the back hallway, and then that's also off the back hallway, and here, off the back hallway. This is the elevator shaft. So we would have to eat a little bit of some of those rooms to put in a modern elevator. But the house has passed all the structural tests. It's just a matter of we can't pay for it right now. So we've got it on the back burner. Yes?
I'm thinking back about 1971. It was a playroom.
There was a schoolroom on the third floor that had been converted into Mrs. Howard's apartment. Or, well, they had expanded the bathroom.
This was a playroom, and it had children's toys and dolls and
Possibly Aunt Annie's bedroom on the third
I
floor?
don't know. I'm just asking.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh, yeah,
when
yeah.
you're a little person, you remember things.
We'll have to ask around some of the board members who aren't here and some of our volunteers and see if anybody remembers that.
Because I didn't see it on there, and I'm like, I know I saw a playroom.
Well, and the thing about these floor plans is they're used in Scenes from Memory, which is just Frances Howard Colhett's memories of the house. And she only lived here for a few years of her childhood, and then they moved to Louisville. So there's, like I said, any floor plan I run into has subtle differences because the house did change occasionally through the years. All right, we're going to take a trip around the house now. Gosh, I keep hitting the, sorry guys, I keep hitting stuff. Not my computer. So here we are on the west elevation. This is the secondary or family entrance to the house. And in the next, well, in a couple of slides, I'm going to talk about the tower more, because the tree blocks everything. But we have the shorter of the two towers here on this side that is fully on this face. It's not on the corner. And then this tower, the library, is directly on the corner. We've got a large, very prominent facade chimney with all of these decorative carved plaques. On the next slide, come on. Slightly better view of the chimney. It's a lot to try to photograph. But here in the eave of this dormer on the third floor, we've got lots of carved plants. You've got floral, canvas leaves, a lot of the common elements that Victorians liked to include in their decorations. And heavy arch. This one, we're going to start at the bottom of the chimney and just work our way up. So down here at the bottom, got a couple of cherubs playing instruments, swag of roses, canvas leaves, some almost like bunting, and a couple of birds. Moving up the chimney above that, just some more floral swags. Above that is our great lady. And I think she is the spirit of industry. We don't really have much written by the Howards about the house, about the choices the Howards made. But we've got, if you think about the industry they were in, we have a rope detail around her, this rod with a chain, her hair is blowing in the wind, and she's looking towards the shipyard. So, this is south in my picture, so that the shipyard is right here, and that is the direction her head is turned. The Victorians loved symbolism. And then above her, we have a wise old owl. So to come back to the taller of the two towers, something else that I've been exploring with the choices they made is how they meant for the house to be approached. When you're coming up the carriage road from Market Street, you're coming at the house at an angle. You're coming directly towards this tower. And I've been wondering if the door on the south side is the main entrance, the one for guests. Why is this fancy chimney over here? Because they're meaning for you to look at both sides at the same time as you approach the house. So, just an idea I had. And you see that a lot on houses that are built on corners. Technically this house is built on a corner, but it's so far in the lot from the side street and Main Street, but it's still that same idea. So now we're fully on the south side with the river behind us. So we have the public entrance, which of course you're coming up from this direction. So you're going to walk up the walk and up to turn and go in. You're not approaching it from this side. And then not quite as much going on with carvings, but still very impressive. If you think about old Louisville, this house would have fit right in. And I'm sure that's what they were thinking. So on the next slide, like before, I'm going to have detailed photos of some of the carvings, and I'll bounce back and forth. If it'll... Okay. So the window that's above the main entrance, this is the carving that's above that window. We've got two more cherubs and another swag of roses. And then, so that you can get your bearings, that's here. And then the next one I'm going to talk about is here. This is Captain Jim's bedroom. So there is the Tiffany window that I pointed out before. So that's this carving. It is a cornucopia with a pair of lovebirds in their nest. And then the two windows flanking the main doorway had an additional decorative lintel piece up above, and with the 37 flood and the fire and how weak sandstone can be, these two additional lintels were decorated, but it's almost all gone. So what I'm going to show you all is this piece right here. This little bit of egg and dart that still exists. That's all that's left. It's like a foot, maybe, of carving. And then this is the bay window in the billiard room on the 3rd floor with these 4 columns. And each little capital is a little different. I don't know if you all can see that from back there. Which afterwards, if there's time, if anybody wants to see these up close, I can scroll back through them. And then we just have a dental detail up above that window. Moving around to the east, I mentioned the den that was added as they were constructing the house. So that's this portion right here, just sort of tacked onto the back. And here's the other side of it. There's some really great leaded glass in this room. So I'm hoping when I start taking pictures for part 2, I'm able to get light coming through just at the right moment because they're great. And so this is, if the house really has a back, this is the back, just because this is where the back door is. Inside the porch here is the door that leads to the back hallway. So family going to and from the back buildings of the property, shipyard workers, anyone bringing deliveries would have been coming to this back porch area. And definitely not decorated really compared to the rest of the house. And last, the north elevation, which everyone sees when they park. Once again, a more secondary elevation compared to the front and the other side. Great place for the utilities. This is an external doorway into the basement. There's another doorway into the basement in the back hallway. And this is the landing on the grand staircase with the traced Tiffany windows. Very briefly, I'm going to bring you all into the basement and then we'll go to the attic. And then I'll open it up to more questions. I mentioned the footprint is pretty much the same from ground up. So you have a bunch of little rooms in the basement that match all the rooms up above. Just the stone walls are a little thicker. And in some areas, some of the exterior walls of the basement, there's a little bit of brick above the stone, just depending on which side of the house you're on. And the basement would not have looked much different than this, actually, when the Howards were living here, because almost all activities by the late Victorian were removed from the basement. You weren't cooking down there, you weren't really doing laundry down there. Everything was done upstairs in your house or in an external building by this point. So I'm sure it was primarily used for storage. The Howards, though, did have one additional use for the basement that most people wouldn't have. They went to Florida for vacation almost every summer. They had a house that they rented down there. They brought an alligator back as a pet and kept it in the basement. And unfortunately, it did not survive the 37th flood. It is really hard to take pictures of the attic where you can tell what's going on. I did mention it's a complex hitch roof. So you've got, even without extra shoring up after the fire, there's framing members everywhere because it's not just standard trusses like we're used to today. And of course, so much of it was destroyed in the 71 fire that now everything that is pale that looks like new wood technically is. This is one original beam. There are others. There's one here. I'm sure there was some behind me. It was just really hard to take pictures up there. But it is sandwiched between modern lumber. There's some scorching on this chimney. It's a really great space. It's just, there's a lot going on up there. So that is really all that I have tonight. I don't know if there's a button where I can just go back to the beginning and keep it the way I have it here, but go ahead and open it up to questions. Yes, Mary?
The decorative trim that has disappeared except for that one little bit. I have seen things done on buildings like in Europe where they take a mold of what's left and they recreate the whole thing. Would it be possible for us to do that?
That is something that the board has actually discussed in the past. I don't think we've talked about it for that particular detail, but there's an area by the family entrance, I think it is, that had recently suffered some damage, and the mason company that we use on a regular basis gave us quotes for direct replacement molding and putting in a new material replacement or stabilizing it as is. You know, so those are options that we do investigate whenever we have damage. We just haven't gotten around to that part yet. Yes.
I'm trying to wrap my head around the front entrance. It's the south side.
Yes.
It's underwhelming. I mean,
I know.
so did they have like a drive that came up off of the east or the west side? And
Yes, if you
make it more like you were approaching it.
when you leave, stand on the corner of the porch of the carriage house here,
Okay.
looking that way, and you'll see the gates.
Oh, okay.
There's a wide gate for carriages and then a small passage gate for people
Okay.
that's right there on the corner at Market Street where you turn in to come into our parking. And so you approach basically that corner of the house.
Okay,
Towards the
okay,
tower.
okay.
Not towards the front door.
Yeah,
But
because
then
I
when
kept
you open
thinking
the
they
front
were
door,
gonna
you see the
come
staircase.
Yeah,
so.
straight through and then turn left, turn
Yeah.
right, and then again.
So here's
Right there, that's the
Oh, I
driveway.
see.
here's what you see. And so you would either get out of your carriage and go over here to the guest entrance basically, or you would come around to the family entrance.
And that's a much more urban style entrance than we normally see around here.
Yeah. And also, this is more of a porch, it's indented, the doorway here is indented a little further than on this side. And then they had awnings that they used throughout the summer. Yes.
I think it's an interesting thing that I remember. On the third floor, where the billiard room is, that people might go look if you have that south facade picture. The corbel under that, at the design, mark, yeah, there. Just under there where it's kind of like a shell shape. You see, yeah, there. That was discovered to be falling off at some point.
Oh, no.
And so what they did was, they took all the wainscoting off inside.
I can see.
In the billiard room, and they brought up a 300-pound panel, a long panel, and put it inside, on the inside wall,
Okay.
inside the room, and then bolted it in to secure it. So it further.
Well, this area does stand out to me now that it has been repointed. The brickwork has been repointed. I can see
Yeah,
a difference
there
there.
should be some kind of bolting to it.
Okay.
See somewhere, I don't know.
They also did, I took all these pictures on the same day. I don't know why this one's so dark. But there's a star up here. That's a tie bolt that goes through the attic to keep the two walls connected to each other of both sides of the house. Any other questions? Yes.
You had mentioned 3 firms were considered. Do you know who you mentioned 2. Do you know who the third firm might have been?
Well, we haven't run across that drawing in our archives.
I just
and-
wonder why Arthur Loomis wasn't. You think it might have been Loomis
Right.
that might have done that? That would be my only guess, is Loomis might have been.
We actually have someone working on our archives right now, so if she runs across something, she will definitely bring it to our attention. And I don't know if anyone had done any research on that other firm before or not, because, Travis just gave me that picture of that drawing, and I read the name on it, and it's like, okay, well, who are they? So I looked them up. And they weren't in business very long, but they were very prominent in upstate New York. And that is an upstate New York house. Anyone else?
And
Yeah.
the other thing you're talking about, they would come in, workers would come in, they actually put a gate in the brick wall.
Yes.
And with a walkway, and then they came in that.
Yes.
Porch
Oh,
area.
yeah,
So
that's
it
right,
would
they
bring
did.
all their
Right up there.
Yes, sir.
A volunteer at the Christina Museum was going through newspaper articles and found information about this building at the exposition over in Louisville. And Caldwell House actually has a print showing two of these buildings. We're not really sure which one it is there, but that article, I think, is back here in the hallway. And more information if you want to read before you leave on the way to the restroom about the building and its original location.
Yes, that is back up on the wall now. There is an information board in the back hallway by the restrooms that talks more about this building.
We didn't have much of an idea where, but we just assumed this was built until that article was found a couple years ago, and it suggested it was brought over, just like you had said, which was amazing.
And I don't know at this point if part 2 is going to just be about the inside of the mansion, and if I'm going to have to do a part 3 about the grounds. We'll just see. Because there are plenty of photos in the archives of pieces of this building. Not like they just stood back and took a picture of it because they wanted a picture of it. It's like a horse in front of the building or something like that. But yes.
When is part 2 gonna happen?
Well, this speaker series is something new that we're trying this year. So technically, whenever I get it put together, which won't take me very long, but we don't have anything further scheduled yet except for some things I'm sure Travis is going to talk more about after I'm finished. But we've got another person working on another talk, I think. Yes.
How long did it take to build a house like this? Do you have any idea?
4 years.
This one was 4 years.
4 years.
4 years.
Do we know what it costs, like back in the day, and then compared to today's?
That's a problem with this house because he used so much of his own labor and materials that he already had in the shipyard. So honestly, the bricks may have been cutting corners, we don't know. If they actually made them here and maybe it's something he explored that was cheaper. So it's like we can approximate, but it's not accurate because we don't know how much money in wood he would have used because that's not just written down somewhere. Yes?
You mentioned that they use the same wood or wood from the shipyard, which of course was being weathered in the water.
Yes.
And Edmonds would go over, Edmonds would go over and pick out, oh, I want this for the house, and that for the house, and so forth. And so Ed also told me that during the flood of 37, which went to the 13th floor and the grand staircase, 13th stair, that none of the floors buckled.
No, I technically I was saving this detail for the other talk, but no, it's okay, it's okay.
Spoiler alert.
This thing would have been 3 hours long if I just let myself go. They did, for all the boats, they seasoned the wood in the river because soaking it in the river let all the minerals soak into the wood. It basically conditioned it to be, damp environment. And so all of the wood elements in the house are shipyard wood, including the floors, all the carvings, the mantles. Everything was built just like it was a riverboat. And so that is why it survived the 37 flood. And now we know that also helped it in the fire. Because that wood was just tougher. Of course, tons of it burned, but it didn't take them very long actually to repair the house. And of course, I'll talk. But we make actually another part of the speaker series.
Was this building used out in the past as a playhouse? I mean, this had community theater.
Yeah,
Yes.
Steamboat
I
Museum.
have people telling me yes. But we're also going to have a talk just on the fires, since both buildings did suffer fires. So, to continue. Any other questions?